Hi guys, it's Mrs. Galvin again. We are going to continue reading the rest of chapter 12, The Mirror of Erised. We left off where he had received the invisibility cloak, who we don't know who he had received it from. It came with a note that just kind of said that it was his father's and that it should belong to Harry, and then it had a Merry Christmas on there. So we don't know where he got it from. But Harry has decided to use it as a way to explore the castle without anybody knowing. So we have a few more pages to go. We left off where he was in the restricted section of the library, and he is going to be trying to find out who Nicholas Flamel is. That's what they were trying to do before. And they had mentioned the restricted section, but they needed a special note from the teacher to get into that section. But it seems that the invisibility cloak has now solved that problem for them. He had started somewhere, setting the lamp down carefully on the floor. He looked along the bottom shelf for an interesting-looking book. A large black and silver volume caught his eye. He pulled it out with difficulty. It was very heavy, and balancing it on his knee, let it fall open, and a piercing, blood-curdling shriek split the silence. The book was screaming. Harry snapped it shut, but the shriek went on, one high, unbroken, ear-splitting note. He stumbled backward and knocked over his lamp, which went out at once. Panicking, he heard footsteps coming down the corridor outside. Stuffing the shrieking book back on the shelf, he ran for it. He passed Filch in the doorway, and Filch's pale, wild eyes looked straight through him. And Harry slipped under Filch's outstretched arm and streaked off up to the corridor, the book shriek still ringing in his ear. He came to a sudden halt in front of a tall suit of armor. He had been so busy getting away from the library that he hadn't paid attention to where he was going. Perhaps it was dark. He didn't recognize where he was at all. There was a suit of armor near the kitchens, and he knew, but he must be 5 floors above there. You asked me to come directly to you, Professor, if anyone was wandering around at night, and somebody's been in the library, restricted section. Harry felt the blood drain out of his face. Wherever he was, Filch must have known a shortcut, because his soft, greasy voice was getting nearer, and to his horror, it was Snape who replied. The restricted section? Well, they can't be far. We'll catch them. Harry stood rooted to the spot as Filch and Snape came around the corner ahead. They couldn't see him, of course, but it was a narrow corridor, and if they came much nearer, they'd knock right into him. The cloak didn't stop him from being solid. He backed away as quietly as he could. A door stood ajar. To his left, it was his only hope. He squeezed through it, holding his breath, trying not to move, and to his relief, managed to get inside the room without their noticing anything. They walked straight past, and Harry leaned against the wall, breathing deeply, listening to their footsteps dying away. That had been close, very close. It was a few seconds before he noticed anything about the room he had hidden in. It looked like an unused classroom. The dark shapes of desks and chairs were piled against the walls, and there was an upturned waste paper basket. But propped up against the wall facing him was something that didn't look as if it belonged there. Something that looked as if someone had just put it there to keep it out of the way. It was a magnificent mirror, as high as the ceiling, with an ornate gold frame standing on 2 clawed feet. There was an inscription carved around the top. Erised stra eru ot ub Kafru ot un woshi. His panic fading now that there was no sound of Filch and Snape, Harry moved nearer to the mirror, wanting to look at himself but see no reflection again, and he stepped in front of it. He had to clap his hands to his mouth to stop himself from screaming. He whirled around, and his heart was pounding far more furiously than when the book had screamed, for he had seen not only himself in the mirror, but a whole crowd of people standing right behind him. But the room was empty. Breathing very fast, he turned slowly back to the mirror, and there he was, reflected in it. White and scared-looking, and there reflected behind him were at least 10 others. Harry looked over his shoulder, but still no one was there. Or were they all invisible too? Was he in fact in a room full of invisible people, and this mirror's trick was that it reflected them, invisible or not? He looked in the mirror again. A woman standing right behind him in his reflection was smiling at him and waving. He reached out a hand and felt the air behind him. If she was really there, he'd touch her. Their reflections were so close together, but he only felt air. She and the others existed only in the mirror. She was a very pretty woman. She had dark red hair, and her eyes are just like mine, Harry thought. Edging a little closer to the glass, bright green, exactly the same shape, but then he noticed she was crying. Smiling, but crying at the same time. The tall, thin, black-haired man standing next to her put his arm around her. He wore glasses, and his hair was very untidy. It stuck up at the back just as Harry's did. Harry was so close to the mirror now that his nose was nearly touching that of his reflection. "Mom?" he whispered. "Dad?" They just looked at him smiling, and slowly Harry looked into the faces of the other people in the mirror and saw other pairs of green eyes like his, other noses like his, even a little old man who looked as though he had Harry's knobbly knees. Harry was looking at his family for the first time in his life. The Potters smiled and waved at Harry, and he stared hungrily back at them. His hands pressed flat against the glass as though he was hoping to fall right through it and reach them. He had a powerful kind of ache inside him, half joy, half terrible sadness. How long he stood there, he didn't know. The reflections did not fade, and he looked and looked until a distant noise brought him back to his senses. He couldn't stay here. He had to find his way back to bed. He tore his eyes away from his mother's face, whispered, "I'll come back," and hurried from the room. "You could have woken me up," said Ron crossly. "You can come tonight. I'm going back. I want to show you the mirror." "I'd like to see your mom and dad," said Ron eagerly. "And I want to see all your family, all the Weasleys. You'll be able to show me your brothers and everyone." "You can see them any old time," said Ron. "Just come around my house this summer. Anyway, maybe it only shows dead people. Shame about not finding Flamel, though. Have some bacon or something. Why aren't you eating anything?" Harry couldn't eat. He had seen his parents and would be seeing them again tonight. He'd almost forgotten about Flamel. Didn't seem very important anymore. Who cared what three-headed dog was guarding? What did it matter if Snape stole it, really? "Are you all right?" said Ron. "You look odd." What Harry feared most was that he might not be able to find the mirror again. With Ron covered in the cloak, too, they had to walk much slower the next night. They tried retracing Harry's route from the library, wandering around the dark passageways for nearly an hour. "I'm freezing," said Ron. "Let's forget it and go back." "No," Harry hissed. "I know it's here somewhere." They passed the ghost of a tall witch gliding in the opposite direction, but saw no one else. And just as Ron started moaning that his feet were dead with cold, Harry spotted the suit of armor. "It's here, just here, yes." They pushed the door open, and Harry dropped the cloak from his shoulders and ran to the mirror. And there they were. His mother and father beamed at the sight of him. "See?" Harry whispered. "I can't see anything. Look at them all. There are loads of them. I can only see you. Look in it properly. Go on, stand where I am." Harry stepped aside, but with Ron in front of the mirror. He couldn't see his family anymore, just Ron in his paisley pajamas. Ron, though, was staring, transfixed at his image. "Look at me," he said. "Can you see all your family standing around you?" "No, I'm alone, but I'm different. I look older, and I'm head boy." "What?" "I'm wearing the badge like Bill used to, and I'm holding the house cup and the Quidditch cup. I'm Quidditch captain, too." Ron tore his eyes away from this splendid sight to look excitedly at Harry. "Do you think this mirror shows the future?" "How can it? All my family are dead. Let me have another look. You had it to yourself all last night. Give me a bit more time." "You're only holding the Quidditch cup? What's interesting about that? I want to see my parents. Don't push me." A sudden noise outside in the corridor put an end to their discussion. They hadn't realized how loudly they'd been talking. "Quick!" Ron threw the cloak back over them as the luminous eyes of Mrs. Norris came around the door. Ron and Harry stood quite still, both thinking the same. Did the cloak work on cats? After what seemed an age, she turned and left. "This isn't safe. She might have gone for Filch. I bet she heard us. Come on." And Ron pulled Harry out of the room. The snow still hadn't melted the next morning. "Want to play chess, Harry?" said Ron. "No." "Why don't we go down and visit Hagrid?" "No, you go. I know what you're thinking about, Harry. That mirror. Don't go back tonight." "Why not?" "I don't know. I've just got a bad feeling about it. Anyway, you've had too many close shaves already. Filch, Snape, and Mrs. Norris are wandering around. So what if they can't see you? What if they walk into you? What if you knock something over?" "You sound like Hermione." "I'm serious, Harry. Don't go." But Harry only had one thought in his head, which was to get back in front of the mirror, and Ron wasn't going to stop him. That third night, he found his way more quickly than before. He was walking so fast he knew he was making more noise than he was wise. But he didn't meet anyone, and there was his mother and father smiling at him again, and one of his grandfathers nodding happily. Harry sank down to sit on the floor in front of the mirror. There was nothing to stop him from staying here all night with his family, nothing at all, except... "So, back again, Harry?" Harry felt as though his inside had turned to ice, and he looked behind him. Sitting on one of the desks by the wall was none other than Albus Dumbledore. Harry must have walked straight past him. So desperate to get to the mirror, he hadn't noticed him. I didn't see you, sir." "Strange how nearsighted being invisible can make you," said Dumbledore, and Harry was relieved to see that he was smiling. "So," said Dumbledore, slipping off the desk to sit on the floor with Harry, "you, like hundreds before you, have discovered the delights of the Mirror of Erised." "I didn't know it was called that, sir." "But I expect you've realized by now what it does. It shows me my family, and it showed your friend Ron himself as head boy. How did you know?" "I don't need a cloak to become invisible," said Dumbledore. "Now, can you think what the Mirror Erised shows us all?" Harry shook his head. "Let me explain. The happiest man on earth would be able to use the Mirror of Erised like a normal mirror. That is, he would look into it and see himself exactly how he is. Does that help?" Harry thought, and then he said slowly, "It shows us what we want, whatever we want." "Yes and no," said Dumbledore quietly. "It shows us nothing more or less than the deepest, most desperate desire of our hearts. You, who have never known your family, see them standing around you." Ronald Weasley, who has always been overshadowed by his brothers, sees himself standing alone, the best of all of them. However, this mirror will give us neither knowledge or truth. Men have wasted away before it, entranced by what they've seen, or been driven mad, not knowing if what it shows is real or even possible. The mirror will be moved to a new home tomorrow, Harry, and I ask you not to go looking for it again. If you ever do run across it, you will now be prepared. It does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live. Remember that. Now, why don't you put that admirable cloak back on and get off to bed? Harry stood up. Sir, Professor Dumbledore, can I ask you something? Obviously, you've just done so, Dumbledore smiled. You may ask me one more thing, however. What do you see when you look in the mirror? I see myself holding a pair of thick woolen socks. Harry stared. One can never have enough socks, said Dumbledore. Another Christmas has come and gone, and I didn't get a single pair. People will insist on giving me books. It was only when he was back in bed that it struck Harry that Dumbledore might not have been quite truthful. But then, he thought, as he shoved Scabbers off his pillow, it had been quite a personal question. Okay, so that was the end of chapter 12, and Harry has found this very special mirror that shows him something that he truly desires, which is to know his family, because he doesn't. But it sounds like Dumbledore is quite correct. He will be wasting away in front of that mirror if he continues to look in it. So I hope you enjoyed this last chapter that we've just read, and I look forward to reading our next chapter in a couple of days. Bye, guys. Have a good day.